Hi, this is Barry. In this video, I'll show you how I made this wooden shoulder plane. I start by cutting a piece of maple to just over the length of the plane. This board is 4/4 and the blade is 3/4 inch wide, and so that's my target, but right now I'm going to leave it a little bit proud, but I'm mostly interested in making sure that the sides are flat and parallel, and I'm also going to true up one edge so that it is perpendicular to the faces. And this edge will be the base of the plane. So with the edge that I just trued up against the fence of the table saw, I'm removing a little bit from both sides so that I end up with a section in the middle that's just a little bit over 1/4 inch. 1/4 inch is the size of the tang, and I want the tang to be able to move in the slot that I'll cut later. And now that I've got the depth set, I start removing from the middle. That test edge, that first part I cut, is going to be waste. So I keep repeating these cuts, moving the table saw blade slightly until I have a slot that is 1 3/4 on each side, and that section in the middle again is just over 1/4 inch deep. And this should do it. Now I'm going to mark the board for the opening which will hold the blade itself. And I'm also going to make a mark for a circle that I'm going to cut out that will act as a relief for the chips as they exit the blade. And I mark the center with a punch so that the drill will find the correct spot when I drill it. And I use a 1-inch Forstner bit on the drill press to make that opening. And I move to my miter saw to make that 45-degree angle cut. Again, this is the back side of the blade. The cut for the other side will be at 37 degrees. And as you can see, that cut was a little rough. I go ahead and clean it up, and I want to make sure that it is perpendicular to the edge of the block. Here I cut some cherry to 1 3/4 width and just a bit longer than the length of the plane, which is about 10 inches. Here I'm doing a dry fit to set the gap that will hold the blade, and I marked it with a couple of triangles so that I can align it up after gluing. Here I want to get a nice even coating of glue, but I do not want it to get in those gaps because it'll just mean more to have to clean up in a very small space later. When I glue this up, I want the base to be as level as I can get it, so I'm using a level as a straight edge, and then I'll clamp up against it to get it perfectly flat. And as the glue is drying, I'll start working on the wedge that will hold the blade in that gap. This is 1/4 inch cherry, and I'm cutting it to oversize and roughly the shape of the wedge. And I used the waste from the previous cut from the block as a rough shape. And I'll go ahead and clean up that cut edge with the hand plane. And this is the part in the video where I say, you can never have too many clamps. Now, although I was pretty careful, there was just a slight bit of glue squeeze out, so I need to use a 1/4 inch chisel to make sure that that's totally clean, but I do want to be careful that I don't change the flatness of the board. And of course I made the wedge too thick because I didn't account for the thickness of the blade. But I can remedy that with the hand plane. This did require a fair amount of trial and error until I got the wedge that was the right shape and size to securely hold the blade in place. Now that the gap is cleaned up, the wedge is made to hold the blade in place, I can go ahead and start cleaning up the outer edges. I trim off the ends, and that makes the overall length just at 10 inches. And then I use the table saw to cut off the waist at the top, and that leaves my overall height at 2 5/8. So now I'm going to use a hand plane to go ahead and clean up the edges and to bring down that final width to just under 3/4 inches, which is the width of the blade. And this will allow the edge of the blade to extend beyond the sides by just a tiny amount. And do a dry fit. It's a little snug, there's not really much room on the mouth opening, but I can remove that here in a minute. And I want to sight down the end to make sure that the edge of the blade is in line with the edge of the plane, and it looks like I'm good. I'm going to round off the corners to give it a little bit more comfortable shape and a better appearance, and I'm using a saw to remove a section from each corner, and then I'm using a block plane to go ahead and round over the edges. More than one way of doing this, but this seemed to do the trick. The exact shape doesn't really matter. It would work as a rectangular block. I just thought this was a little bit more aesthetic and a little bit more comfortable. I'm adding just one thin coat of finish. This is a combination of boiled linseed oil and varnish that I made. And I'm wiping it off immediately. I just want a thin coat to protect the finish. And it also brings out the grain in the wood and makes it look a little bit nicer, I think. And there's some interesting grain pattern in that cherry that I kind of like. It's starting to look like a plane. So let the finish dry overnight, and it's time to do the final adjustments on the mouth opening. And at this point it's a very snug fit, which is what I wanted. It's much easier to remove material than it is to put it back. So I'm being careful to align the edge of the blade to the base of the plane. And you'll see that there really is no gap. So I'm going to have to open that up in just a minute. But here you can see how all the pieces fit together and the overall shape. And I'm just going to use a bench chisel to open that mouth opening just a little bit. There's just a small gap there. So a little tap to align the blade. Looks good. Snug that wedge in place. I think it's time for a test cut. I need a little practice getting that blade height set just right. But hey, I'm making shavings. And since the blade is just a little bit wider than the body of the plane, I'm able to get in there and get a nice, good edge on the inside of that shoulder. And here it is, all finished and ready to put to use. So I hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions or comments, please place those in the section below. Otherwise, please check the like button, and if you haven't already done so, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel. So I appreciate you watching. I'll see you next time.